Good morning, everyone. So this panel is going to be about, I guess, tales from the road. So I think everyone on this panel is an entrepreneur, and we just wanted to share some insight. I know a lot of people are here fundraising. I think we'll dive into that kind of pretty deeply. My name is Matt Davidson, and I am a PhD in immunology. And about 6 years ago, started a medical dermatology company called Verrica Pharmaceuticals that is treating medical skin conditions, and ran that company for about 6 years from inception until an IPO over the summer. And have been through all of the fundraising stages from seed, angel, Series A, Series B, Series C, and then public offering. And it's been a really exciting journey. And now I'm doing angel investing and advising. And I'm going to let the other two panelists, we have 2 more panelists coming. Hopefully they'll be here soon. But we'll talk about fundraising, how to find investors, and kind of some of our own personal experiences and lessons learned. So Prem, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Prem. Nice to meet you all. I started this company, Miramis, in 2010. We spun out of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, building animal models using RNA interference technologies. So we had a little different story where we, in the lab, I was working on, we were building these models, built a very efficient way to make them. And so we got a contract from the National Cancer Institute for about $2.5 million to build 1,500 of these. And so once we were done, did this in about 2 years or so, but during that time, we just approached global investors and they said, would you like to keep this going? So they initially seeded the company with $2 million, followed up by another 2.8. So we've been funded about 4.8 or so since then, and then another $2 million in SBIR funding. So what's unique about our story is that what I realized early on was, to be able to compete in this industry, I needed a good partner. So we started partnering with Charles River Laboratories very early on, since 2012. So we built a big partnership with them, and now we do all of the animal engineering for Charles River North America.
Hi, good morning. Thomas Lai. Other than other entrepreneurs, I'm a research orientation for last more than 30 years. I spent my lifetime at Harvard area and Taipei medical area as well. Both areas as my base. And also as an opinion leader in Taiwan. So the government wants me to build up the more system as a biotech other than only research, and to get the publication and get the point, which in Taiwan called SCI point. But in the last 5 years, I spent my lifetime to, after lifetime of the research, and start to build up the entrepreneur startup company. I have some experience from the ASEAN aspect, from the Taiwan side, how to build up. I found from the Taiwan, from the Asian that countries, the most important for them is to go to global, the first. The second one, try to lower as much as lower you can the burn rate. Means you have to decrease your capital size and also increase the weight of your technology. That have to compete with the global. That's from my aspect. Thank you. I can share my experience with everyone.
Yeah, so I'm curious, there's a lot of different ways that people can raise money. For you, why did you decide to go the grant route? I mean, I know it's non-dilutive, which is always a benefit, but were there other reasons you pursued that as opposed to going out and trying to raise venture capital or even money from someone like Charles River at the very beginning?
So I think grants are sort of validation for your company as well, validation of your research, of your tools, of what you're doing and developing. So it gives the investors, when you go to try to raise additional funding, that you really do know what you're doing. You've been peer reviewed, and your research has been validated. So I think that's why we did it as well. But yeah, it's not a small chunk of change. I think it is really nice to have undiluted funding. We've received even now another phase 1, and once you've completed those milestones for phase 1, I mean, you're 95% really in the running for the phase 2. So that's another 1.5 to 2 million in undiluted funding, and you can really keep going like this as long as you can balance it, because even though your review, your score comes back really well, the officer says, okay, you're likely to get this funding, it can take them a year to release the funds even. So it's a balance that you have to make between doing, fundraising from VCs and also trying to do non-dilutive funding.
No, it's a really good point as far as when money actually is coming in and how long the process takes. I guess, Thomas, what was your experience like for fundraising for these newest ventures, and when did you actually get checks and were they on time? And you talked about burn rate and trying to manage that. How's that come into play with actually fundraising experience?
From my experience, the fundraising is a big issue, but we can survive because we don't need to have too much money to survive. The first. And second one is when I say about the biotech, the most important is the technology and how your technology is, how good. And when you say you are good, but you have to be competed with other global. The best way is in like in the US, among like this event or others in Tokyo or in other like European leading events. You have to show yourself, and through that FDA application, you have to say why you can pass that without huge money, without burn rate. So I developed most of my challenges, how to decrease the application fee and how can decrease, like Brent just mentioned the animal model, and I decreased more than 10 different kinds of animal models. Each one, I just decreased the animal model from pickle dog, from pig until rabbit, until rat. Yes, I'm using rat. Yeah, I have to convince the FDA officer if I can use a rat instead of pickle dog, and I can save a huge money, and also I can save the time. And it depends how you deal with it. Yeah.
And I think my experience is actually a little bit different than your guys. My experience has been more of the traditional fundraising. I would have loved to have gotten $2 million grant at the beginning. It would have been awesome because it's non-dilutive, but was really going out and finding investors for dilutive funding, which can be chunky. I guess this is a really small group, so I guess from you guys, are you interested in fundraising? Are you interested in hearing kind of ideation stories? Why are you guys here? And maybe we can talk to the issues that you guys think are exciting before I dive into what I have kind of written down. I mean,
Both sides of it for me, to be honest.
fundraising, fundraising over there. Fundraising. So I guess early stage fundraising is really hard. I think it's not uncommon to pitch hundreds of people before you really get the money you're after. I guess for you, in the grant process, did those grants come easily, or how many grants did you have to write before you got? I mean, it sounds like you had a continuation of some academic work, maybe made it a little easier than it would be for someone starting out.
So probably the first 2 grants I wrote, I did use a consulting firm, got templates, everything, to that, but they were rejected even with a consulting firm helping me. And then you sort of learn the style of how to write them and what's the format, and you can almost churn them out pretty quickly once you've got the flow of it. And so now I don't really find it a burden. I find it just, all right.
Are you still writing grants yourself, or do you have people now helping you do it?
I do delegate a lot of it, but I still do a lot of the final drafting and tuning. But again, fundraising, and I think if any of you have spoken to Dennis here, who runs this conference, it is what he says it is. You have to find the right investors, and I've been very fortunate to have the right investors from the very start. And so every new, Miramis has been the stepping stone now to really be able to spin out other companies. And so when I've had that, now I have introductions to the right people through my current investors. And so I think that that's the thing, that I've had the trust of them. And I couldn't have been more fortunate. So they're a very unique set of investors that have taken someone straight out of the academic lab and trained them over the past 8-9 years now to really now being a seasoned CEO and running. Now we have 3 companies under the Miramis umbrella. So.
Matthew, I have a question. You may help us. In your successful fundraising career, do you have any block you have to overcome? Can you give some example for audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about fit is probably the biggest one. I mean, there's a million investors out there, but most of them are not going to be right for your project. And it may be they're not interested in the space, it may be the size is wrong. I think one of the biggest lessons learned for me was about fit was pitching a really big fund called Venrock, and they loved the project I was doing at Verica. This was for a Series A financing. I was looking to raise $3 million at the time, and Venrock is a very big fund, and one of the partners turned to me and she said, "Your project is a cupcake." And I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "It's going to be really successful, but it's just too small for Venrock to get involved." And at the time I was like, "You're nuts. You're going to make a ton of money on this project. Why would you not do it?" And now, 5 or 6 years later, I kind of understand. The venture partners and the way it's structured, they have a certain amount of money to put to work, and it makes their life a lot easier if they're putting it to work in big chunks. They don't want to make, out of a $100 million fund, 100 investments. They would rather make one investment or 2 investments and manage those 2 investments more carefully. So, you know, a $3 million check wasn't the size check that Venrock writes, and I should have known that going in. So I think it's really important to do your diligence on the investor and figure out, do they invest in this space? Are their check sizes the right size? Do they invest at this stage? And really understand what their past successes have been. I think that's another really important one. Have they made money doing something similar before? If they haven't, it's going to be very hard to convince them to start now on you. But I think you should really make sure you're taking those targeted shots and that you have the right fit, and meet as many people as you can to figure out what that pool of investors may look like and whittle it down to those people that really do think like they would be the right fit. And for me, what we at Verica ended up raising money from was actually a family office who had success with a similar project that kind of checked all the boxes. They took something on that looked very similar and made a ton of money doing it. And so when they saw the Verica project, it made a lot of sense for them, and probably were only a handful of investors now in hindsight who had that similar experience where it would have made sense.
Great.
Yes.
For you, you got money from governments outside the United States, right? A little bit? Is that right?
Yes.
So how does that work? I mean, not just for Taiwan, but I guess what have you learned from working with kind of these other pools of financing that maybe people don't really understand exist, that they may be able to tap into outside the United States?
From the background, tax talks. Yeah, I mean, I'm from Taiwan, so I have some relatives and friends in Taiwan. They appreciate what I was working. Also in Japan and in the US as well, because during my life career at Harvard area, they recruit all people from overseas, from Japan, from other places. So we knew each other, and they knew what I was going and I'm going to do. So they invest the money to me. And actually, my capital is okay, but if just mention, if you want to be a real company, not only a startup company, that small capital is not enough actually. So we are looking for the new capital, new brand, and to let my startup company to become a real, true.
So I think one thing you touched on is you know, part of this is getting a term sheet and getting someone interested in your business, but that's really only kind of the first step of before you get money in. So I'd be curious, both your experiences, how term sheet negotiation has gone. I know you've raised money now from both grants, but also from private investors, and it can be pretty contentious at times. I think everyone has the experience that, you know, you see a term sheet and everything looks great, and then when you get into the details, you can come to head. So what have some lessons learned been, and like pitfalls maybe?
Sure. I think looking back, you know, and to your point, the paperwork on an investment, whether it's 1 million, 2 million, or 100 million, is pretty much the same. And that's why investors will say to you, you know, they don't want to do these small deals, so you have to have the right size. But you also have to say, okay, what you're going to use the investment for. And so looking back on all of that, and the term sheets and all that, you know, we went back and forth, this and that. You know, the dilution fear, the points here and there, they really don't make a difference in the long run if your company is successful. So I think that that's just the thing to point out and get everyone on that same page. And so, what I always had difficulty with, unfortunately, was sort of dealing with academic institutions, getting that licensing negotiations, because they always valued their technology much more at the early stage and tried to take big upfront payments, make you pay for all the IP and everything. And those conversations are harder because you're saying, look, do you want, a lot of something that's worth a lot, or like you're going to strip me of my current investment for things that, maybe we don't make it with this technology. So I think from when we started this company, Miramis, that was the hardest negotiations. It took about 1.5 years to negotiate the licensing terms with the institution that I came out
And
with.
what finally kind of got you over the hurdle with them? What was there any realization that made it click with your institution for making that license happen, or were they just slow because they're a big institution?
Again, it was a part of overvaluing, the IP, and so what I had to do was sort of narrow what was the business going to do, prove it successful, and then try to go out and get more rights on the licenses.
And so were you able to convince them that it was less valuable, or at some point did you just say, look, I want to move forward and I'm going to take a little bit of a hit to make this get going?
Yes, because I just took the hit, because after a certain period of time, every day that you can't, you can't sell something, we were really at that point of starting. We had about 6 months of R&D to do, and then we could start selling. So we could make profits, revenues early on. So that was really hurting. So I just took the hit. And then after 2 years, renegotiated with the institution, narrowed it down, cut the fees, and then later on, again, cut the fees. So that's what I had to do over time, is just sort of suck it up in the beginning and then renegotiate as you go along and you have more leverage.
What about for you?
Yeah, no. For me, before that, can I have one question?
Yeah.
For you? So, I know we all are looking for the funding, and so we are eager to get that. But when the potential investor come, how do you choose? How do you choose that? Because not every investor fit you. Because sometimes if you got that investment, you may cause the trouble for your company. Maybe. Do you have that?
Yeah, I have a lot of experience there. I think first off, most entrepreneurs are not really going to have a choice. I think it's rare to get a term sheet that works from any investor. To be able to be a pick of the litter is kind of unusual, I would say. And if you can have multiple investors who are interested and be able to choose which one you want, you're in a great position. My experience was I pitched, I think, 103 people before we got our first term sheet. And so when that term sheet came along, there wasn't a lot of choice right there. There were other investors I would have preferred at the end of the day, but if the money's there, you have to kind of be practical about it. And I think this idea of taking a hit earlier on to move the business forward is true. You may end up with less, but you want to make sure you actually have a business that's valuable, and so you need to be realistic about that. And I think the dilution that happens earlier on can be significant, but if you get to those next stages, you're going to be diluted less and less, hopefully, because you're creating value. And I think the best advice I got was from one of my advisors, and when we had the term sheet and had to make a go or no go, he said, is anyone else going to write you a check today? And the answer was no, and he said, shut up and take the money. And so that's what I did, and I think that experience is going to be common. And so you'll be lucky if you have multiple investors, and you need to be practical and understand what you're trying to achieve. And if 10% or 20% is going to really make the difference, then probably the business isn't as big of a business as you really want it to be to move forward.
Yeah, thank you. To answer your question, because the variance of the strengths for each company is different. So my part, because I'm research orientation, so I thought to be a good company, you have to be, the first one is consistent. The second one insisted that what you are doing or you were doing. So in my example is that I kept my research track in 30 years, and I do publish new technology yearly. So that's my strength. So I can get a grant from each way. So I also found when investors appreciate your work, in the beginning you have to tell them there's a long drive, may or may not get revenue back. So that should be taxed a long time. So in Chinese, in Taiwan, they will inject your investor a little bit earlier. So that's an injection. So it's they get immunity. They don't expect too much revenue, too much. That's my experience.
So how do you guys think about valuation? I think that's always a really important issue for young companies, is to understand, you don't have revenue typically. It's in a space where valuation has been all over the board. You think your technology is amazing, but maybe investors think it's kind of run of the mill. How did you guys finally get to these numbers with investors that everyone was satisfied with for those investors?
I don't know. It's sometimes it's all a shot in the dark, right? I mean, you're really, I think having you have to look at prior business models, right? You have to look at what other companies have done. What do their revenues look like? You do have to do your sort of market analysis. I know these reports can be very expensive, so you've got to run to the local library and get your IBIS reports and try to look at everything you can to support what it is you think, and where you should be developing.
Could you touch on that? That's something I don't know about, but that
sure.
sounds like a great tip of how you could actually do that in a practical way without spending a ton of money.
Yeah, so in New York, we have the Library of Science and Technology, and they have subscriptions to a lot of these very expensive reports, such as IBIS and other things. You can go there and find, from wherever. So you just go to the public library, you can download these things and utilize that rather than paying, $5,000-$6,000 per report. And it is that much money, sometimes more. So I utilize that, and then you just use that to carve out your supportive evidence of, what the market value is, what you can gain, what percentage of the market you're trying to capture. So as long as you have that support and evidence to point out to your investors, then they start to listen to you. If you're just sort of pulling it out of nowhere or just from a Google, and someone posted this number, it's hard to believe that. But when you can show them, this is what the industry says.
And as a follow-up to that, so you presented your number, this is our valuation. At the end of the day, the financing, how close or far away were you from that first kind of thought of what your valuation would be?
Honestly, sometimes it's not even, sometimes it's just what works for you, What do you want to see at the end of the day? What do you want to cash out? What's the long-term goal? Sometimes you have to have that goal and then say, okay, this is what I want to have at the end of this year, and that's why I'm evaluating at this, and then build the evidence to make your company worth that much. What is your revenues going to look like? What can you do? How many people do you need to build to that point? Sometimes it's more emotional than it really is, the real thing, because, how much do you think your energy and all of that is worth? And so, I remember going through this process with Charles River, right? So we have gone through many negotiations back and forth. And at the end of the day, there was a number we had in mind because of the way our preferred shares were structured. And once we got
Otherwise,
to
someone would have been underwater,
right.
And said, and yeah.
Right. And so that was sort of, all right, here's our bottom number, and here's why.
Yeah.
Okay, we can accept that. They were like $1 million under, and they said, okay, we can accept that because we understand. Otherwise, we're not in the game if we're not going to reach that number. So I think that's sometimes, the way to go about it. Because sometimes you can, forecasting is forecasting. It's just forecasting. You don't know that you're going to make it, right?
Mark, you want to introduce yourself to the group, give your background, and then I guess where you are and kind of your general fundraising experience for the group?
Absolutely. Hi, sorry for being late. Mark Allen. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Elevian. We're a preclinical stage therapeutics company developing biologics that target aging based upon discoveries of our scientific co-founders at Harvard University. We have closed to date $5.5 million of seed, so the company was just formed in late 2017. We did an initial safe then, and then we did another kind of half of it late 2017, half of it in late spring of 2018. And at that point, we really cranked up our hiring, added our scientific team. We are currently working on a Series A, so having very active discussions with the next set of venture capitalists for a larger round, and we're really letting the market help us to determine exactly how much we can need, because we can be pretty flexible in terms of how we pour on the spend based upon, I think, the interest from the investment community.
So you mentioned a safe. I know what that is, but I think a lot of people probably don't understand what a safe is and kind of what these convertible note type vehicles are. Can you explain why you did that?
Safe
what that
is by far the best first round for a company. There's no question about it. It does not set a price. So that's the greatest thing, because how do you price a company initially? That's number one advantage. Number two advantage is, so it's basically what it is it's a convertible note. They used to have convertible notes that had interest associated with them and had certain terms associated with them that were not so founder friendly. This is a super founder friendly convertible note. So it's got no interest. It converts automatically when you raise a certain amount in a priced round. It typically has two terms associated with it. Number one is it has a cap that it converts at. So it will not convert it at more than 20 million as a pre-money valuation. So if you raise it 30 million, they get it at 20 million. The second term it has is a discount, which is typically 15 to 20%, which says even if you price less than that cap, they'll get some advantage, some discount to what the venture capitalists invested. So and the other thing about it is that it's a super simple note.
It's like 2 pages, right?
Yeah, like just a few pages.
Yeah.
They're available online for free versions that you can use. So very low legal costs, and then you can start raising from one investor at a time. On our safe, we actually did have a couple of additional terms on it. We had to our anchor investor, which was helpful in bringing on a lot of other investors, required that we close a certain amount. They didn't want to be the only check-in. They also required for us, since we were doing an academic license, that for us we could draw down like half of the money and then the other half once we closed that academic license. So the investors might put in a couple of extra things. I think we just did those terms as a side letter to not muddy up the original document. So it's very, very, very simple document to do, and super flexible. And so it allows you, when you have it, you can go out to one investor at a time, and you can, literally bring in small checks. And if you don't have that you can't take money until you get a certain amount, and you can start using the money right away. So you're just super flexible. The Safe Note, venture investors are used to it. They will invest in it in seed rounds. They will also invest on top of it, so on that next round. So the issue with the Safe Note is that if it gets too big relative to your new round, then the investors might not like that. They might say, well, because basically what happens is that all of the new shares become your Series A, for example. So all of the Safe Notes will convert into Series A. And if those investors convert at far lower and have a greater number of shares, then that might be an issue. So you don't want to have too high of safe relative to the amount that you're going to take for your Series A. But very, very helpful and useful instrument.
I think it's actually really new. When I was doing our seed rounds, it wasn't even really a thing, and we did a convertible note, and I would say after hearing about it and being able to download a template to just use, I was kind of, when my mind was blown, I was like, this is so great for investors, because everyone does seem to be pretty comfortable with it. It seems to be a fair deal, depending on what the discount is set at. And it just simplifies the process, because, as you alluded to before, no one really knows what the valuation is of these young companies, and so it allows you to get a little bit further, a little more advanced, and you can have some sense of what the company's actually valued at. Another thing you kind of brought up in negotiation was, I guess, this idea of leverage and how you get it as a young investor and not having to set those terms right away. I guess this is more of a question for Prem, maybe, is how do you leverage what you have already, and how do you leverage this idea of, we have some checks in, but we need more checks to try to get investors in the game. People have said, investors really only have two emotions, it's fear and greed. And, just to create this sense of fear of missing out potentially in your investment. I mean, for anyone here.
Well, as you get out there and you start to pitch and you start to meet more people, I mean, you can sort of tell them the truth, yes, I have this one potentially, you're not. So I think just being on the road gives you that opportunity to leverage yourself. You're saying I'm talking to 50 people, I gave 100 pitches, I have X and X interests. So you sort of put them in that position of, look, do you want in now or not? But leveraging yourself as you move the company forward too, you're building value to yourself and how important you are to the company too. So I think just sort of flipping this, not from the early stage, but later on when you can renegotiate and ask for better terms for yourself too. So I think there's two different timepieces to this.
For me, it's occasionally I show my true value for the company. I show the real data and the solid work. That's the concern. That really consume a lot of our resources, and also tell the investor, this result, and also that's the future. And also, the most important for my company, I don't really need too much capital value for each time. Yeah. So also I very carefully select the investor. The investor should 100%, that's my dream. That should 100% just support my work. No doubting. Just everyone is a different case. Thank you. Let me show your case. I guess. Yeah. It's good. Deep, right.
And so when you've closed these financing, I guess what resources have you guys used to make sure that the terms were fair, and that, especially if you haven't done it before, that you weren't making a terrible mistake by signing on the dotted line?
So the safe is a great thing because it doesn't set the terms. So that one's nice. And the question is, what do you set that pre-money cap to? And you're just building a story around that. Where you think you'll do the round, and but ultimately they're protected. They're going to get a discount. Then with the venture capital priced round, it's really just a matter of getting multiple term sheets. And if you only get one term sheet, don't expect to get the best valuation. It's just, anything that you're trading, you want to make sure that you're setting a market value. That said, I think it's a really important lesson to not try to to let the first venture capital set that market value for you, because what you don't want to do is overshoot the price and the venture capitalist sits out, because you're better off getting a term sheet and then negotiating from that term sheet to get a higher valuation than waiting around for a term sheet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've met with companies at this conference who've said, I have a Series A idea, I have no data, and I said, what's your pre-money? And they said, $55 million. Good luck. No one is going to bite on that. Yeah. You have to be realistic that, that's the kind of valuation you can achieve once you have clinical data or really proof of concept, maybe. And I think making sure you have a business in the future is more important than trying to maximize that valuation. And to your point also, you want to make sure that all your investors early on see that step up in valuation in the future. Absolutely. And you don't want to have down rounds or have rounds that get too big where your early investors sit out because they think the company is overvalued. It really is a terrible signal to other investors if they're not going to continue to participate in future rounds.
I have one question. Do you think the best time to go IPO?
I mean, the public markets are really interesting. This was my first time kind of tapping into them, and the middle of last year was a great time for biotech. There was IPOs once or twice a day. Now it's pretty rocky and valuations have taken a hit. I think the market was a little over exuberant before. I think you're going to continue to see IPOs. I mean, there's some that are happening right now that are actually delayed by some of the government shutdown stuff, but companies are still going out. I think it's going to be lower valuations. The companies are going to have to be a little more mature. Last year you saw companies IPOing on preclinical data, which is really unusual. So I think the bar was probably a little bit too low before, and it's going to kind of have to be a little bit higher. There's only about 10 minutes left, so I kind of wanted to open it up. If anyone has a question for the panel or anyone here, or just something they want to know about more. If not, then we'll keep on going. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I guess for young companies in the
I do have a question
Yeah.
for you guys. So when you wind up in a situation where you have several offers, that's an enviable situation to be in. Have you tried to manage that yourselves? You know, when you have several term sheets to work through, or do you work with, you know, there's a long list of service providers that will gladly, for a small fee, you know, provide their negotiating skills. How have you managed that?
I think some of it is figuring out what value add the investors are bringing. There's a lot of kind of nuance there. I think in an ideal world, you don't want a single investor in the company because it ends up being kind of lopsided. So you want maybe 2 or 3 investors in the perfect scenario. And also to understand, our investors bring something to the table that's not money, that's not really going to show up on that term sheet. Their credentials or their connections. For me personally, we had a good law firm that I really respected and advisors who had been through it before to really say this term is not appropriate or this is not industry standard, but it can be hard to know what's fair at the end of the day. So I guess my advice would be good lawyers who have seen hundreds or thousands of deals and advisors who have been through it before to guide you.
Are important.
Yeah. You guys have?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's a couple of questions there. Is you know, who do you get advice from, and then how do you help to negotiate? And then I think a specific question is, do you use brokers? So, you know, brokers at early stages, in my opinion, are just not good ideas because they're not going to tell the story like the founder is. You know, folks like Resi coming to these conferences, you're going to have the opportunity to meet lots of investors. You know, the best is through network. You know, so I'm not sure that brokers can provide value at that early stage. And then, you know, question is, can they help to negotiate, you know, an increased value? You know, maybe. You know, I use brokers on sales of companies, and you know, I've got a term sheet. I've done this a couple of times where we got a term sheet and we used a broker and I would say that they added value. They brought a lot more players to the table. And I guess the big question is, do you have the time and the energy and the desire to go out and talk to the market, to a lot of investors, to really get a competitive bid into the company? Now, once you have multiple term sheets, you know, you have a question, a scenario: are these investors mutually exclusive, or are they compatible? There's a huge advantage in a biotech company that requires a lot of capital to have multiple investors. And so what we did is we brought investors together in it. And we had some investors that said, we want to take the whole thing in our earliest round. And we said that doesn't really make a lot of sense. We have a single point of failure here. You know, if you've got plenty of investors, and we have 6 institutional investors, if one of them doesn't move forward, it doesn't hurt us as long as we have some that are supportive of the company. But you know, I really don't advise against that single point of failure.
Oh, that's helpful.
I guess so. We have 5 minutes left. I guess. Oh, go back. Yeah.
Yeah, a question about how much value addition an investor can bring. So I'm based in Asia, so there's Asian investors who don't claim to bring a lot of value, but then their valuation is quite favorable. And then there's US-based investors who claim to bring a lot of value, but the valuation is much lower. So I guess the decision point, it depends on how much value a really value-added investor brings. I was curious, your perspective as an entrepreneur, year, what that is and how valuable that is.
I think it depends on what your goals are. For us, we did a Series B and Series C with investors who maybe weren't going to give us the best value, but were respected by other people as kind of industry leaders and would attract follow-on valuations. And there's a bit of gamesmanship as it comes to these later rounds that become larger and larger, where, you know, institutional investors will really do their most diligence at a Series A, and as the checks get larger, they really start to look at other factors like who else has invested, and that becomes really important for later financings and even for the public markets where people say, look, this person's in, he's done really great, he's got a golden touch, so that can be important. But you need to set your goals and priorities. If you're looking for, you know, partnerships, for example, has your investor brought those partners in before they just cash? And so I think you need to look at your priorities and where you want to be in 2 or 5 years and see if those investors have played a role like that before that you would consider to be valuable, more valuable than just the cash. Do you guys have, I mean, you did a deal with Charles River. That was, I think, value add probably, not just a check.
Yeah, so what stage are you at where you are? You know, do you need the connections they have? Do they have specific KOLs, you know, key opinion leaders that are useful to you? You know, like my current investors, they host a lot of gala dinners with a lot of, you know, lead scientists, Nobel Prize winners. You know, the networking is immense, and it allows me to reach people and to have that ability to access, you know, heads of academic institutions and things like that. Or are you developing something internally where the money is more valuable, so you want that higher evaluation, and you know, you don't really need a lot of outside, but what you need to do is hire the really strong people, so now you have more money to pay them. You know, what is it that you need? I think that's what you just sort of have to put on a piece of paper and kind of weigh that. Because sometimes, yes, an introduction is more valuable than, you know, money at that time, because they're going to be your biggest client, right? So.
Like maybe a couple minutes left. So if you could go back to kind of these critical milestones for this group, what's kind of the most important thing you could give to this group to embrace as they move forward? I think most of them fundraising early stage companies.
Yeah. I would like to echo just Prem just mentioned. To maintain or increase your leadership or leader impact in your specific technology. Yeah. That's my experience. If you certainly proportionally just increase that or report that, and you will get the respect, and the money will come, and also you can choose the investor. Now that's my experience that people may think about.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. You know, I'm on the road now raising about $25 million for a new spin out, and I see a lot of pitches, and I think some people need to film themselves giving their own pitch and just ask, you know, are you falling asleep during your own pitch? You know, I'm in cancer biology, and I'm listening to some of these pitches, and it's even too scientific for me. You know, so I think that that's a really important thing to do. Tell your story, tell it short and sweet. If they give you 15 minutes to talk, only talk for 8. You know, leave room for questions, but only, you know, you have to watch yourself. And if you can't interest yourself, you know, in your own video, then you've got an issue, and you have to know your audience. I mean, I think that's the biggest point of advice I can give.
Both great advice. I'm going to try to say something a little different. You have to kiss a lot of frogs, and just realize that this is a numbers game. You don't need to. You could be the worse than the worst professional baseball player or high school baseball player. You got to get one hit, right? That's it. So the more people that you talk to, the more that you're going to find the right investor for whatever reason. And then the second point is learn, and you know, but don't be a pinball machine. So try to learn everything. Use everything. That's what makes it worthwhile. When you're going to get all these no's, how do you get yourself through it? Because learn. So ask questions. What do they think? At what point would you make an investment in me? What advice do you have for me? So learn from that. But at the same time, be careful not to be a pinball, because you might get very, very different points of advice. So, you know, for me, it's It's I've got a vision, I'm trying to go in a certain direction, but I'm going to try to make it stronger by taking what I can from different investors I talk to.
And I think my last point would be you have to plant a lot of seeds, as you said, but also keep in mind that people will come into play later in your life that you've met 5 years earlier and be that kind of shining knight. And so meet as many people as you can, network as much as you can, be really gracious. People are going to tell you no for reasons that you disagree with. And instead of calling them idiots, try to understand their perspective and know they may come back around 3 years later and be interested. And so it is a numbers game, but it's also a game of really sharing your story with everyone and asking people for advice and help. Sometimes investors will say, we can't write you a check. You should definitely follow up and say, well, I also need a chief medical officer. Do you know anyone else? And people are, I think, very willing to help and bring products to market, even if they don't have the cash for your specific project. They love seeing that you're doing something to help the world, hopefully, and to help you along your journey. So I think with that, I think we're basically out of time. So thank you, everyone. I think we'll probably stick around for a couple minutes if you have questions, maybe in the back. Thanks.